Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Before we start with our today's analysis, a quick gentle reminder. Byjus Exam Prep IAS has already launched its official Telegram channel. If you have not yet joined the channel, please do join so that you get all the current affairs related updates. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says the governor is under the constitution, not above it. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. There are two ways of reading the constitution. One is what is called as an originalism or the originalist approach. Second is what is called as the living tree approach, or this is also called as the progressive interpretation doctrine. First, let us understand the meaning of originalist approach or the originalism. We have the Constituent Assembly debates that have taken place, the multiple debates that took place during the formation stages of the Constitution, and ultimately what we have is the article for the Indian Constitution. So what is the original intent of the Constituent Assembly debates? What is the original intent of the framers of the Constitution and how it has to be interpreted? The bare meaning of the Constitution is what is called as originalism, which means to say the wordings that are present in the Constitution and the original meaning attached to it as given by the thinkers, the makers of the Constitution, is what is called as originalism. This is also called as originalist approach. Then we have something called as the living tree approach or something called as the progressive interpretation doctrine. What is this progressive interpretation or the living tree approach? When we speak about tree, what happens? It grows constantly with the changing times. This can also be interpreted as the organic constitution. So for example, when you look at the original constitution, we have Article 21. Article 21 speaks about right to life and liberty. But then over a period of time, we have the Supreme Court of India which has given multiple interpretations to Article 21. Article 21 now will have right to life with respect to environment. It will have right to life with respect to health as well. Right to privacy is also part of Article 21. Was it originally interpreted in that terms? No. Article 21 in terms of originalist approach basically spoke about right to life, procedure established by law, but it did not speak about different interpretations. So those interpretations which the Supreme Court goes on to give is what is called as living tree approach, progressive interpretation doctrine, or the organic constitution. Let me give you another example. Let's say for example, we have the untouchability. Untouchability is basically specified under Article 17. When you speak about the original intention of the Article 17, it basically speaks about the caste biasness. Certain section of the people were ostracized. They were not being treated as equal to other humans, which is why untouchability was illegalized, which means no person would be able to conduct this practice of untouchability. So the original meaning was in terms of the caste, but over a period of time, a number of Supreme Court judges with respect to the LGBT community, with respect to the women entering the temples as well as the mosques, the untouchability has been given a new meaning. So the original intent or the originalism is basically speaking about Article 17 in terms of the caste, but when it comes to the living tree approach, it is speaking in reference to the LGBT community. If LGBT community is not seen equal to other human beings, there is untouchability, a new meaning given to the LGBT community because they are not seen as equals, because they are not able to live with their freedom. So the Supreme Court interpreted the untouchability in terms of the LGBT community because they faced issues in the society. Added to it, if women were not able to go to temples, if women were not able to go to mosques or any other places of worship, in that case, this was also equated to untouchability. This is what is called as the living tree approach. Why are we discussing this? That is because when we speak about this particular concept equated to governor, what we have is Constituent Assembly debates that took place. There is something called as originalism, which means that we have the Constituent Assembly debates. You had the writers of the Constitution who debated what should be the line of thinking when it comes to the powers of the governor. That is originalism, because the Constituent Assembly debates and the writers of the Constitution discussed what should be the power that has to be given to the governor. But over a period of time, there have been number of landmark judgments delivered by the Supreme Supreme Court of India, and the interpretation which has varied and changed over a period of time by the Supreme Court is what is called as living tree approach. Let us look at some of the articles which are associated with the powers of the governor. We have Article 153, which speaks about governors of the state. There shall be governor for each state, provided nothing in this article shall prevent the appointment of the same person as governor for two or more states. Article 153 says that we require governor for every state. It can be the same person who is also appointed for one state and another state as well. Then we have Article 154, which speaks about the executive power of the state. The executive power of the state shall be vested in the governor and shall be exercised by him either directly or through officers subordinate to him in accordance with this constitution. So if the executive power has to be exercised, the governor would be able to exercise it directly or through his officers who are subordinate to him when it comes to the executive functions of the governor. Added to it, what we have to look at is Article 154 of 2 of A, which basically says be deemed to transfer to the governor any functions conferred by any existing law or any other authority. This basically means it prohibits the governor from exercising any function conferred by existing law or any other authority. So if there is a law which mandates that some other authority will have to do it, then the governor need not have to perform such a function. Added to it, the parliament or the state legislature may confer by law functions on any authority subordinate to the governor is what is specified under Article 154 of the Indian Constitution. Then we have Article 163, which speaks about Council of Ministers to aid and advise the governor. There shall be a Council of Ministers with the Chief Minister at the head to aid and advise the governor in any exercise of his functions, except in so far as he is by or under the Constitution required to exercise his functions or any of them in his discretion. So whenever the governor has to conduct business of the house, which is mentioned under 166, conduct of business of the government of a state, the governor shall make rules for the more convenient transaction of the business of the government of the state and for the allocation among ministers of the said business, in so far as it is not business with respect to which the governor is by or under this constitution required to act in his discretion. So all the businesses, all the activities of the governor will have to go hand in hand with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So we will have the Chief Minister who will head the Council of Ministers. You will also have other ministers as well. They will give some of the advice to the governor and the governor will have to comply by it except in those aspects where he has the discretion. So what is this discretion? Where do we have this discretion? Is what is being clarified in Shamsher Singh versus the state of Punjab and another. This happens to be one of the landmark judgments delivered by the Supreme Court of India. Wherever the constitution requires the satisfaction of the president or the governor for the exercise of any power or function by the president or the governor as the case may be. As far as example is concerned, Article 123, 213, 311, 317, 352, 356, 360, the satisfaction required by the constitution is the satisfaction of the president or of the governor in the constitutional sense under the cabinet system of the government, which basically means the Supreme Court has also clarified that when it comes to these areas, when the governor is interpreting, carrying out the business of the house, in that case the aid and advice of the cabinet will have to be heard and followed by the governor. The court went on to hold that the discretion conferred on the governor means that as the constitutional or the formal head of the state, the power is vested in him and it is only in exercise of power under Article 356 that the governor will be justified in exercising his discretion even against the aid and the advice of the Council of Ministers. What if we have one of the state governments? The state government is not following the ethos, the principles of the constitution. In that case, they would be able to impose the president rule in the state. Only with respect to this matter, the governor need not have to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. The Council of Ministers may say that please do not impose the president rule or the state emergency, but then the governor can write a report, send it to the president, and ask the president to impose the presidential rule in that particular state, primarily because the state is not functioning within the contours of the constitution. Except in this, in rest or most of the cases, the governor has to comply by the aid and advice of the governor, says this article. So basically, when you look at the larger area, it simply goes on to say that the governor, yes, is the executive head of the state, but then what has to be given a mandate is to the representation of the people, which is represented by the chief minister and the council of ministers. Ultimately, he has to listen to the council of ministers. Now let's look at what has been discussed in the Constituent Assembly debates. In 1949, Professor K.T. Shah, debating Article 130 back then, now Article 154, said the Constitution should make it imperative upon the governor to use its power in accordance with the Constitution and law, that is to say, on the advice of his ministers, as provided for in the subsequent clauses and other parts of the Constitution. He reiterates that the governor should listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. It was hotly debated whether the governor should be appointed by the President of India or should be elected. Fearing that this could create a parallel state leadership, the Assembly instead adopted appointment by the President. In order to prevent, who is good, who has to concentrate the power in the state? Is it the governor or it is the chief minister? If there is election for the governor, it means there will be clash between the governor as well as the chief minister. Who will run the show in the state will become a friction point. In order to prevent it, there is something called as appointment by the president. So he nominates one of the governor who was selected to prevent this frictional point. P.K. Sen said the question is whether by interfering the governor would be upholding the democratic idea or subverting it. It would really be a surrender of democracy. We have decided that the governor should be a constitutional head. He would be the person really to lubricate the machinery and to see it that the wheels are going well by reason and not of his interference but of his friendly intervention. This basically means that this particular person who is appointed by the central government as the governor of that state should not interfere and should not actively participate in the politics of the state, which means to say for the daily businesses you should not engage and interfere for all the activities of the state government. If there is an issue, he has to take the confidence of the council of ministers, put it out in a sweet and in a friendly manner so that they are able to comply by it, but an interference is not accepted, said P.K. Sen. Then we have K.M. Munshi, who said, all things considered, it would be better to have a governor nominated by the center who is free from the passions and jealousies of the local party politics. Then we have B.R. Ambedkar, who said, the drafting committee felt, as everybody in this house knows, that the governor is not to have any kind of functions. To use a familiar phraseology, no functions which is required to discharge either in the discretion or in his individual judgment according to the principles of the new constitution. He is required to follow the advice of the ministry in all matters. Finally, we have T.T. Krishnamachari, who went on to say, if my honorable friend understands that the governor cannot act on his own, he can only act on the advice of the ministry, then the whole pictures will fall clearly in its proper place before him. These are clearly the originalistic principle, and the subsequent judgments of the Supreme Court also clearly reiterate that yes, the governor is the executive head, but then reading 163, it clearly depicts that he has to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So the Council of Ministers, whatever they say, the ministry, whatever they say, the governor will have to comply except in those areas where his discretion can be taken up. Let's say in the case of hung assembly, or let's say if there is no confidence in the house, or let's say to do with 356 where the president rule has has to be applied. In all these cases, he has the discretionary power, but in rest of the cases, aid and advice of the Council of Ministers will have to be taken into picture, says this article. So this article goes on to say that whenever the government gives the bill for the assent, the governor will have to do so until and unless it is not violating the federal principles, and at the same time this article goes on to conclude that he is not above the constitution, but he is under the constitution and has to follow the ethos and principles and fundamentals that have been established by the Constitution of India. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, yes, the Indian Air Force needs a new doctrine. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. Let me simplify this concept for you. We have something called as the Atmanirbharata or the self-reliance. This basically means that India would be designing, coming up with its own manufacturing process where we don't have to depend on some other country for the import of the defense equipment. So what is Atmanirbharata? It is nothing but self-reliance, where India would be able to manufacture its own share of equipments, defense related equipments, armaments, so on and so forth. When we speak about the newspaper, the print media, the visual media, they are all happy about this way of indigenization and Atmanirbharata and self-reliance. We should all be happy about it, but at the same time, we need to have a future plan, and this future plan is all to do with the doctrine, says this article. As of now, we do not have the Air Force doctrine. Yes, we do have the doctrine, but it has become vintage in itself. So what we have to come up with is called as an Air Force doctrine, so that we have a clear cut procedure and the guideline that in case there are any discrepancies in the near future, we would be able to address them. So what is this article speaking about? The article goes on to say that we have seen indigenization of the Indian aircrafts, helicopters and other equipment, so on and so forth. It is good for now, but what we have to do is come up with an Air Force doctrine, so that in the near future, if there are any issues, we can look up to this doctrine and address and follow the guidelines for the near future. When we speak about doctrine, it is the best way of doing a thing, which means there is a clear-cut set of principles that needs to be followed by the government of India, by a particular department, and all these will have to be followed according to the terms and conditions as established by the doctrine. So a doctrine is nothing but the best way of doing a thing. So whenever we are establishing an Air Force doctrine, this has to take into picture what has happened in the past. So we have to learn lessons from the past, we have to know about our present capabilities, and we should also explore the future as well. So identifying the experiences from the past, learning from the present, and being better and thinking for the future in terms of the research and development, and infusing more technological updates like artificial intelligence should all be part of this doctrine, says this article. So this article goes on to say that there are series of recommendations that have to be considered, and these recommendations will have to be placed in this future doctrine for the Air Force. What are some of the suggestions or some of the ideas espoused by the author? First, he goes on to say that the doctrine of the Indian Air Force should be reviewed and made public to guide the future development and application of India's air power. We have one of the doctrines that is currently there, which happens to be designed in the year 2012. There have been subsequent changes as well, but the major one was in the year 2012. But after that, now we are in 2022, the doctrine has to be changed as well, because we have seen massive changes in the world structure. As a result, whenever you are coming up with a doctrine, ensure that these ideas of technological update, artificial intelligence, technological booster in comparison to another country is taken into picture and added into this doctrine. So basically, for the past 1 decade or so, we have seen massive improvements when it comes to the global community. Countries are coming up with its own share of aircrafts, so we have to take an update from it. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these challenges will have to be addressed in the new doctrine, is the first recommendation. The second says the roles and missions of the Indian Air Force would have to be reassessed, since space will be a major, if not a a central player in the future conflicts. What do we understand by this? When we speak about different areas of military functionality, what we have to look at is we have the army for the land, we have the navy for the waters, we also have the air force as well. These are the traditional forces of the military. In addition to this, of late what we have is two domains. One happens to be the cyber domain, where we have cyber warfare initiated by the country. Added to it, what we have is the space domain. The space domain is where we have our satellites that are launched. So in the present situation, there are multiple satellites that are hosted by India. So is with United States of America, so is with China, Russia, so on and so forth. But in the near future, another state of war could also be with respect to the satellites as well. So we should be in a ready position, and the Air Force doctrine should also include some of the apprehensions relating to the space sector is another recommendation. So space, which is now a physical domain, which is in par with the sea, land, air and cyberspace, should all be taken into picture, and this should also be added as part of the Air Force doctrine. Then what we have is the airborne intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, precision attack capabilities. These are multiple domains of its own. Each has its own share of functionality. How are we going to merge all these domains so that we do not have any compatibility issues? There are some departments which take care of few. There are other functionalities and institutions which take care of other set of functions. So how are we going to integrate? How are we making sure that we have a close coordination amongst all these areas? That has to be present on the Air Force doctrine is the third recommendation. The fourth is in reference to the two-front threat. Let's say, for example, when you consider India, we have the two-front threat. What do we understand by this? On the western side, we have Pakistan, which is a threat. On the northeastern side, what we have is a threat from China. So in order to counter this, what we require is the support from other countries. Let's say, for example, we are engaging with the Quad, where the Quad will have United States of America, we will also have Japan, we will also have Australia as well. So how are we going to have all the connections with these countries? What should be the future course of action will have to be decided by the political executive. We cannot have a gray area that we will do this, we will not do this, but instead follow a clear cut structure, come up with a guideline, so that if we have a guideline, we can refer to that, and this has to be mastered and put up on the Air Force doctrine is the fourth recommendation. Fifth is in terms of multi-domain power synchronization. What do we understand by this? Let's say, for example, there are different areas like the army, the navy, the air force. Each has its own share as well. One of the major shares that is also coming into picture is the air force. So how are we making sure that all these areas are interconnected? How are we going to coordinate with them? That also will have to be put up as part of the Air Force doctrine. And we have to keep out the political prism. What do we understand by this? Let's say, for example, we have one of the political parties, let's say BJP, or let's say we have another political party, let's say Congress. So we have the NDA and the UPA. They come up with one of the policy initiatives with respect to the Air Force. But what would happen? Because there are political parties which change, the government coalitions also change, they bring about a massive change when it comes to the policy of the warfare. So whenever there is a policy doctrine with respect to Air Force that is made, it should not be in terms of political parties or the coalitions, but it should be on the focus of country and nation. And as a result, whenever the political parties design a policy, they should not frequently keep changing it, but the opposition should also be taken into the confidence. Whosoever is the opposition, their confidence should be taken, and such a policy once initiated should not be changed periodically, so that we have the continuity is another recommendation. Finally, we do have the aircrafts. These aircraft like the Rafale or multiple other aircrafts have been brought from multiple other countries as well. We do have enough number of squadrons which has to be increased in the near future, but this number alone is not enough. The Air Force will require other equipments apart from these aircraft, which includes aerial refuelers, airborne warning and control system, transport and helicopter fleets, radars, communication system are also vital in operations. So whenever you are coming up with an Air Force doctrine, in that case, ensure that apart from the aircrafts, these things are also taken into picture. So this article basically is saying that as of now, we do not have an updated doctrine for the Air Force. So make sure you come up with a doctrine and add all these aspects into the doctrine. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says draft digital data protection bill table for comments. This article currently is speaking about the draft data protection bill. This is currently being called as the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill of 2022. This is currently put up for the public consultation, and people can also comment on this particular draft regulation bill, and this will be present on the online platforms till December 17th, and after which the government will take some of the recommendations and ultimately it will be introduced in the budget session. So what are we speaking about? We are speaking about the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill. Let's discuss some of the key aspects and provisions of this legislation. The first is in reference to the cross-border data flows. What is this cross-border data flows? We did discuss in our CNA recently about data localization. What is this data localization? The data of the country citizens should be within the boundaries of the country, and this data should not be exported to another country. That is what is called as data localization. When you look into the earlier bills of the 2019, it was very specific about data localization, and it say that all the countries, that is, let's say for example companies of other countries like FB, that is the Facebook, now Meta, or let's say Twitter, or let's say Google, if they are holding some information, these information should be only within the country's borders. So they have to host the servers in India and the data should not be exported. But now in this new bill, what has the government suggested? The government has gone ahead and said the data could be sent to another country. However, such data will be decided by the government, which means to say what kind of data can be exported and which country can this data be sent. If there is a country and if they have very good data protection legislation, in that case the government may allow. Earlier legislation said that you're not supposed to share the data or send the data to any other country, but it has to be restricted within the boundaries of India. But now this data can be exported if that country has a data protection legislation and the government so decides which this country is. This is the first major provision of the bill. The second is in reference to the data breach. What do we understand by data breach? Let's say for example, we have something called as the data principal. Who is the data principal? Let's say I as an individual, you as an individual, we give our data to the companies. So when you and I give the data, we become the data principals. So if I have given data to Facebook or to Twitter or to any other company for that matter, if this data gets leaked, if this data is hacked, if this data is thrown out to the public without my consent, that is what is called as data breach. So a data breach basically means that without the consent of the data principal, the person who has given the data, his data is out in the public or is taken by someone else without the consent of the data principal. So if case there is any data breach, such entities which have failed to take reasonable security safeguards to prevent personal data breaches will be fined as much as 250 crores. So if there is a company, if it is not able to make sure that the data is intact, if there is a breach of data, they can be imposed with as much as rupees 250 crores. And at the same time, if an entity fails to notify users about a data breach, the fine could go up to as much as 200 crores as well. This is about data breach. The government has also given exemptions to the national security related issues. When we speak about national security related issues, it can be with respect to sovereignty of India, security of the country, friendly relationship with foreign states, maintenance of the public order, preventing incitement to any cognizable offense relating to any of these. In such a case, this data can be taken by the government of India. So in this case, data protection need not be provided. So an exemption is given by the government of India under this proposal. Then we have the startups that also have to be taken care of, because we are a country which has a large scale demographic dividend. We also have number of entrepreneurs as well who want to contribute to the growth of the country. They did have issues in the earlier registration. So the government could now exempt certain businesses from adhering to the provisions of the bill on the basis of number of users and volume of personal data processed by the entity. So when it comes to such startups, there will again be few exemptions that will be given by the government of India. This will be decided on a case to case basis by the government of India. Then we have something called as the Data Protection Board. When you consider the earlier version of the draft bill, they had something called as the Data Protection Authority. So instead of board, what they had was the authority. In the new proposal, they have come up with the Data Protection Board. Whenever there are guidelines given under this bill, the Data Protection Board will ensure the compliance of the legislation. So the draft bill has not given any details about the composition of the board, but then the government will explain about it in the near future. Finally, what we have is the data principle. The data principle happens to be you, me, or any person who has given his information either to the government or to the private agencies. If they so desire, they can withdraw their consent anytime. Let's say you have given the consent to Facebook to use your data today, that is to Meta, Twitter, so on and so forth. But let's say after a week or after a month you decide to withdraw your consent, you would be able to do so as well. These are some of the important provisions as part of this new bill proposed by the government of India, and it is also on the public platform. The government of India is expecting some feedback as well, and after taking the feedback after December 17th, the government will then introduce the bill in the budget session. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Supreme Court rejects petition to create independent environment service. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. The Supreme Court has refused to intervene and direct the government to create an independent Indian environment service within the All India Service cadre. Now the question is, what is this Indian Environment Service? There was one of the high-level committee that was constituted back in the year 2014 under the chairmanship of TSR Subramaniam, who was the former cabinet secretary. This committee was appointed basically to review all the environmental laws in the country. Let's say, for example, we have the Environmental Protection Act of 1986, or we have the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, or we have the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, we have the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974, Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1981. All these laws are the environmental laws. So this committee, TSR Subramaniam committee, was appointed to look into whether we have to bring changes in all these environmental laws. What did the committee say? The committee said that we have a strong environmental policy, legislative framework, but when it comes to the implementation is not right, and this has resulted in environmental misgovernance, said the TSR Subramaniam committee. In order to ensure that we have the right implementation, this committee had proposed for the establishment of what is called as the Indian Environmental Service. So this Indian Environmental Service will be part of the All India cadre, and they will ensure that all the laws that have been designed by the government will be implemented. But then the Supreme Court had already questioned the government that are they ready to implement something like that. The government had also said that they would not be coming up with the Indian Environmental Service in the past as well. So the Supreme Court in the present situation has declined to intervene or accept this particular petition. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says sweet knot protein in bamboo fruits triggers rat boom. The article here is speaking about one of the plant species called as Melocanna bacifera. This happens to be a tropical bamboo species. So remember, Melocanna bacifera is one of the bamboo species, and this can be important from the preliminary examination point of view. It is called as Muli in northeast India. Melocanna bacifera is the largest fruit producing bamboo and is native to northeast India Myanmar region. So it is native to the northeast India Myanmar region. During its gregarious flowering, the bamboo produces large fruits as shown in the image, which draw animal visitors. Of these, black rats greatly relish the fleshy, berry-like fruit. Initially, it was assumed that these rats were binging on this particular fruit primarily because it was a source of protein. But a number of studies were conducted, and ultimately they went on to say that this is mainly due to the high content of the sugar. It is not because of the protein as it was initially assumed, but it is because of the high content of the sugar. Also note, during the flowery season of this bamboo, the rats also multiply, which is called as the rat flood, and once the fruits are gone, they start devouring the standing crops, causing famines that have claimed thousands of human lives as well. This happens to be another concern that is associated with respect to these rats. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. With the help of the Constituent Assembly debates, shed light on the gubernatorial role, powers and duties. Next question, faced with the challenging security environment, the advent of new technologies and the issue of scarce finance, the IAF needs a revised guiding document to help it navigate ahead smoothly. Substantiate. Please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.